Well, thanks for throwing another log on the fire, Joran. Now we can say that this
Hey,
is a fireside chat.
zing.
Very cool.
Getting warmed up.
Yes, we're just getting warmed up. So, yes, so Rachel Leigh here, and I reached out to Joran because recently started working in closer proximity with him and wanted to ask him some questions that have just been burning in my brain.
Like the fire, like the fireplace.
I get it.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
punny.
Hmm.
I thought that we could maybe just do this and record it and kind of see what happens. So thanks for offering some of your time, Dorn. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Yeah,
So let's dive in.
sure.
Number one, I'm now I've been pulled into this world of visual consulting, right? So help me understand, and potentially anybody else that would watch this, what the heck is visual consulting and facilitation, and how did you get into an obscure field like that?
Yeah, yeah. Okay. So I'd say visual consulting began, back in the late 60s, early 70s when I think the man's name was John Ball. One of my friends and mentors, David Sibbett, who's kind of one of the grandfathers of visual consulting, that told me the story of this guy who was across the hallway from him back in the early 70s. And his thing was he would draw a picture of a rainbow with a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. And that was a visual that they would use on a flip chart or a whiteboard or a chalkboard to communicate sales goals or strategy or ranking or organizing data in a way that needed to be visualized. And that was just the go-to, right? That was Ball's go-to, was the rainbow and the pot of gold. And it wasn't long after that David founded The Grove, his own consulting company, and developed what he called group graphics, it wasn't just a linear display of information. You needed sometimes just a poster display or a radial display or a popcorn display. Like there were all these different ways to visualize and synthesize information within a group. And so, the Grove's group graphics were born. I mean, that's really kind of the genesis of what I would call visual consulting. I mean, there are, consultants, briefcase consultants, going all the way back to the 50s that don't use graphics. The big four consulting agencies will, their deliverables might be a PowerPoint or a spreadsheet. And while those things require eyeballs to look at, I wouldn't call those visual tools. Visual consulting now, in the modern age, in the contemporary age, is using things like butcher paper on a wall and using artists or graphic recorders to reflect back the conversations or the data points that you're trying to capture, or using visually collaborative tools like Mural or Miro to actually do the work asynchronously or in person to, drive outcomes or arrive at a consensus, or, just map or heat map, So visual consulting's come a long way from the rainbow and the pot of gold, but that's, I think, in a nutshell what it is. And I think the other thing to know that's important for context is that there are different types of consulting. There are expert consultants who will come in and be able to lend their expertise within an organization based on their decades of experience in adjacent or parallel, sometimes, industries. There is the pair of hands consultant that will come in and just do work, right? Do some research or help with some of the heavy lifting of a project, sometimes a design project or a project product or project management within an organization, because the organization doesn't have the staff, and they need to bring in an extra pair of hands. There is the kind of doctor-patient relationship in consulting, where somebody would come in and diagnose a problem and make some recommendations, which could include coaching. And there's the process, what's called the process consultant, which comes in to an organization, reflects the organization's thinking, and enables and facilitates the leaders within the organization to make informed and empowered decisions within the business. They're not making the recommendations. They're not bringing any particular expertise, but they are helping to design a process which educates and informs the organization and the leaders within to actually drive the business. So I would say visual consulting is a form of process consulting. If you want to get like really geeky about it, right, then that I think is important context to have. The first answer, though, I think is the Swiss Army of like, we're using graphics and we're reflecting the bright line through your thinking, through creativity and visual information and using visual tools. That for me is how I would define visual consulting.
Okay. So you, with Illustrious, then you essentially are process consultants, is what I heard in that, through these various tools that you mentioned, and kind of like techniques or standards.
Mm-hmm.
And who better to bring into an organization than an artist and a creative if you're looking for change or innovation or creative ideas? I mean, sometimes it's difficult when when something's so close to the tip of your nose, you can't really see it. You do have to pan out a little bit farther and get a different perspective. So that makes a lot of sense. So thanks for sharing that.
Yeah. And I think the second part of that was how did I
Yeah,
arrive at this,
exactly.
right?
Yeah. How did you get into a field like this?
So because my background was in marketing. For over a decade, I was in media at an alt weekly, and I did marketing and promotions and PR for a media company. And so afterward, I got into some other creative work, and coaching, and I took some time off and started a couple of businesses of myself. I owned a wellness center for a while, but eventually I landed at a consultancy where they needed a graphic recorder. They just needed an artist to come in and draw pictures during business meetings. That's how it was sold to me. And when I saw the ad, I thought to myself, well, I've seen that happen. I've been to TED Talks and South by Southwest, and I've seen that artist at an easel next to the stage, or sometimes even on stage, but under a spotlight over there, and like doing the work and capturing the talk or the panel discussion or whatever. And I thought, man, I had no idea people were being paid to do that work. I didn't know that was a career. I didn't know that was something you could do. And because of my art background and design background, I thought, that's a no-brainer. I can do this easy. I can do this literally with one hand tied behind my back. And I went into the consultancy. They brought me on and trained me as a graphic recorder. And I grew within that environment to train other graphic recorders. I then became a facilitator and kind of what you might call a junior consultant, training under the CEO and our chief innovation officer, who was leading all of the engagements. And so I began to take some of the consulting work on and learned how to facilitate, and then trained other facilitators to do that work. And so it was a naturally scalable, as the company grew and as our client base grew, the team grew, and I helped lead that team and train that team. And I'd say at the end of the beginning of the end of 2020, there were a bunch of us that were laid off from the consultancy, and three of us kind of said, well, we still love doing this work. Why don't we keep doing this work and helping businesses? And I began Illustrious in November of 2020.
Awesome. So, well, that's fantastic. And it like everything else, with a creative, again, you just kind of fall into it, right? And don't realize the pot of gold that you're sitting on until somebody reflects it back to you. Exactly. So I guess then in that case, what are some of the typical challenges then that executives come to you with? Like, what are some of the things that you're presented with in these corporate scenarios that you really feel it's necessary for a visual process consultant or facilitator to come in and help with?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it does. It does vary. And so it's everything from, Well, as far as like, client pain points, right? There are people who come to us experiencing kind of change, the friction or the discomfort of change. It's either through rapid growth, which is most times what we're seeing. Sometimes it's occasionally a merger or an acquisition where they've acquired a different team and a different culture and different strategic initiatives. And it's like, how do we fold this all together? But in general, it is, for better or worse, a misalignment, right? Like we don't have the people in the right seats. We don't even have the right roles identified yet. We've got 13 strategic initiatives that we're calling must-win battles, but our team can't tell us what they are, and they can't reflect the top 3 objectives this quarter. What do we do, right? It's getting everybody on the same page and aligned around either their vision, mission, values, strategy, you name it. But alignment is the name of the game for us. And so it's everything from those really high level organizational needs and kind of what would fall into the category of change management, down to at the department or division level. Let's say a team needs just an experience, a workshop, or even sometimes just a mural designed for them, that either we can come in and run for the team, or that we can train the trainer style to run for their team. But it's everything from visual storytelling to journey mapping, service model blueprints, customer experience journeys, to sometimes story brand, which helps the product or operations team tell a better story to the marketing department. It also could be something kind of fun, like a design sprint. I remember the last job we did at the old consultancy was a big design sprint for like the top Fortune 50 companies in the world. And it was just really fast paced and fun, and like a game show, and had everybody, kind of playing together. They were a customer advisory board, so it was just really fun and interactive, and everybody's getting to know each other. So everything from, and a design sprint is something you would typically run inside one organization to get people better at like design thinking or prototyping, problem solving, creative problem solving, all with the end result of innovation in mind. So innovation training, innovation consulting is always also part of it. So I know that's a lot, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we have a big toolbox of visual tools and consulting tools and facilitation tools and techniques and maps and methods to bring to bear on a wide array of problems. But really, it does come down to change, misalignment, fatigue, irrelevance. I mean, those are the big things that we hear from people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I also heard in that, how you address those common challenges. So thanks for sharing, some of the tools that you actually do use, because I think that helps make more sense out of, I guess, what is to be expected in the process, which I think can be perhaps a little obscure for some people that aren't familiar with the craft or know that it even exists, right?
Oh, yeah.
So that's helpful.
Yeah, I mean, everybody thinks, oh my God, you're bringing in a consultant. They think, oh shit, what's wrong? Something's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And we're in trouble. A consultant's got to come in, right? Like, and it is that you get that image evoked of a guy with a briefcase who's going to come in and point at things and tell you what's wrong and tell you what to do, and then walk away, leaving you this bag of problems,
Yeah.
And I won't say that's not what happens with some consultants. I'm just saying that's not what we do. That's not how we do it, And, the other thing is, you say to an organization or to a team, we're bringing in a facilitator, to do a team exercise or something, no matter, it doesn't matter how you language that or spin that to your team. And we help people craft that really meticulously sometime. Like how do you tell your team what we're about to do so that they're not, as resistant. But yeah, you cannot avoid thinking sometimes that, okay, a facilitator is going to come in, we're going to do this team building thing. It's going to be this fun, silly thing. And then it's not, we're just going to be a waste of 2 to 4 hours, and then we go back to our jobs,
Mm-hmm. Do you guys do you address negativity like that? Is that something that you do come in and do for
Yeah, I mean, as
businesses?
much
'Cause
as we
that's a mindset.
can, we onboard the leadership to train their teams to communicate about that ahead of time as much as possible. And as much as possible, we address that in the room. You know, as facilitators, we are trained to handle the pushback or the apathy or the silence or whatever's happening in the room, and kind of working with that to kind of bring forth the best ideas or the best outcomes. So yeah, we address it.
I guess in that case, what's one thing that you wish you would have known going into this field that you know now that you wish you would have known from the get-go? Do you feel like there was one
Hmm.
specific thing that I guess you've integrated in at this point that you're like, oh,
I think the one thing that I wish I'd known, and it doesn't have to do with the work or the practice itself, or the development. I think it's more about the running of the business. The one thing that I wish I was prepared for, a year and a half to 2 years ago, was that the outbound marketing for consulting is rarely going to work. All the clients are going to come from word of mouth.
mm,
Everybody's going to be a referral. Everything is going to be based on trust and rapport. And this is an unspoken rule in
mhm.
sales and marketing, right? But I think in consulting, it's like 99.99% of your clients are going to be, nobody's going to, throw a dart in the yellow pages, or, just
Like,
reply to your spammy LinkedIn message that you send them. It
right.
doesn't work that way. Consultants are engaged based on trust, based on a knowledge of them, and a strong referral and a warm introduction. And it's a lot of faith and a lot of trust. And so building that network and enabling that trust and treating your clients really, really well with a lot of respect and over delivering when it comes to value. One of our values at Illustrious is a commitment to quality outcomes. I mean, we're meticulous, things are proofed and reproofed, and we redo our, graphic records until, there's everything's right. And just from visually to our communication tools to the set of deliverables that a client receives. I mean, our commitment to quality outcomes is one of our top three values. So knowing that means, the client is at the center of the story. Getting those results and being able to tell the story about those results is just front and center.
Yeah, what I hear in that is that it is a very intimate business ultimately, and you had said the word trust, and that's exactly it. And you can't necessarily build that trust up from a spammy email or,
No.
some quick little, 1 minute, plug of who you are and what you do. There has to be some level of emotion attached to the outcome, and not everybody's actually able to really see that for themselves. They have to experience it in some
And I,
capacity.
just to be clear, I'm not saying that inbound marketing, that outbound marketing doesn't work. Inbound marketing is a step above. I think that if you're giving away value, if you're giving away a premium or a download or an ebook or a glossary or something kind of visual artifact, as a tool to enable change for people, and you're growing your lists in a way, and you're really writing educational and vulnerable blog posts all the time about the work, and getting to grow your audience and your list and your network in that way, that enables the trust building, right? That lets people into your world and lets them see what you're doing to a degree that eventually, when it is time for them to bring in a consultant or a facilitator or a coach, they go, I know the perfect team. I know the right guy. I know the right girl. I've been reading their stuff for months now. They're amazing. I'd love to work with them. That's the idea, is that you're building that trust and that rapport up so that there's no question who to turn to, you
Mhm.
know?
So in that case, then what do you enjoy most about what it is that you do? I mean, it's great to see you light up with all of these concepts and to be talking about it. But what is the one thing that keeps you
Mm.
coming back, that you know that this is the field that you want to be in and that you choose to be in every day?
I touched on it a little bit before with the pushback and like, having clear objectives and agendas. But I think the one thing that has consistently for the last, 7, maybe 8 now, however many years I've been doing this, that always fires me up. At the end of a workshop or a session or a call or something, at the end of it, the thing that I'm applauding and celebrating the most is that when one person starts as a small head on the call, or in the room, they're leaning back in their chair and they're slumping and they're whatever, they're not engaged. But by the end of it, they're right here with you. They're leaning in and they're ready and they're engaged and they're contributing and they're turned on and they're lit up and they're excited to move forward and they're hungry to know what the next steps are at the end of the meeting. And
Mm.
that turnaround, and again, like sometimes it's just one person and sometimes it's subtle and sometimes it's really dramatic, but that shift for me that's magical, because it's like,
Results.
who knows what that one person went from in the beginning of the meeting, non-contributing, apathetic, to highly engaged and invested in the outcome and the results, and to make whatever change or action or initiative is required. They're excited to do it. So who knows what subtle change in the room has done for, kind of at a macro level for the organization. When just one person gets excited like that, it can sometimes magnify and amplify throughout the organization. So when I see that stuff happening live in real time, people getting excited and it's the best, it's part of the work. But to me, it's, I love watching it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, the inspiration, right? The inspiration that we can elicit. So
Mhm.
in that case, then what are, who are some of your mentors? What inspires you right now? Who inspires you?
Man, I mean, so many people, because I've got some really great kind of legacy mentors, right? Like David Sibbitt, who I've already mentioned, who's founded the Grove Consultants and is again, like the progenitor and original source of a lot of this material and these methods and these techniques. He's come to be a friend and a mentor, and I highly value the relationship I have with him. And the same could be said to a lesser degree, but I'm still connected with and work with a creativity coach named Eric Maisel. And when I was just starting my coaching path, 7 years ago, no, longer than that, probably 9 years ago, he was the one who I kind of stumbled onto, and then turns out he's kind of he's the premier foremost creative. He kind of is the go-to, and so getting to know him now over the years and being able to work with him has been amazing, because he's a great coach. And coaching is also, the executive coaching side of the business is something that I'm also really passionate about and dedicated to. So becoming a better coach, that development in myself, is something I've committed to. So having him as a partner is really great, and then there's people who, like you said, just kind of inspire me or motivate me. Three kind of come to mind right now. They're peers, I wouldn't call them competitors, but we do similar work. They're in the ecosystem. One of them is Douglas Ferguson at Voltage Control. He's just done a really amazing job at growing a community of facilitators called Control the Room, with an annual conference and weekly calls. I mean, he's just really great, and they're now moving into certification of facilitators. So he's being very specific about what he's doing. Brian Turallo is another one, and he has a company called Lizard Brain, and he is just, from technology to techniques to maps and methods and the history of facilitation, this guy is just a geek in the best sense of the word. And I love getting on calls with him and just talking about the art and the craft and the history and just like having amazing conversations. And he also does amazing work, just amazing work. And the third one, I would say, another peer, is Lauren Green, and she has a company called Dancing with Markers. She has a history as a dancer, and so she brings a lot of the principles and methodologies of movement and energy and embodiment to her work and her facilitation style. Every time I see Lauren run a meeting or lead a Zoom call or guide people through a mural, I'm like, man, that's who I would want running my workshop. You know, she's just so in tune with the energy and thinking things before people say them, and she's just really skilled at facilitation. And I mean, there's countless others. You know, there's lots of people who are writing books, and you know, people who I'm reading and studying. But those are the kind of the big ones that come to mind now. And I have to give credit where credit is due and just give some love to you and Geoff, because like you guys as my team are like the shoulders I stand on to deliver the work that we do, to do the work that we do. And I couldn't do the work without the team I have. So, you know, I just have a lot of love and appreciation and respect for both of you and what you have brought to the table as well.
Thank you. Well, you're worth it. You know, you're somebody that's very easy to believe in because of the innovation and creativity that you just bring to a room. It's a natural presence and it's a natural aptitude that you have. So, in terms of innovation, right? Because you mentioned a lot of innovators, you mentioned a lot of people that they think they process things so quickly, and what's shot out on the other side is like, oh, wow. Okay. Yeah. I didn't know that you could describe red in that way. Right.
Mhm.
So, how has innovation played a part in the evolution of Illustrious? You know, for a business that goes into other businesses with the assertion that they're going to help in so many ways, you know, journey mapping, story brand, design sprints, you know, all this innovation consulting. How do you adhere to some sort of, you know, innovation precedent in your own business? Like, what are the ways that you continue to push forward for yourself, and how you're leading for your brand?
That's a really great question. And I'm going to come at it from a few different ways. The first is that the formation of the company itself is an example of, you know, composting and converting failure into, you know, what could be the next best thing, you know, layoffs, firings, separations, all of this stuff can be really painful and emotional. And I'm not saying it wasn't, but we were able to keep our heads about us and kind of inventory not only the tools that had been put in our hands, but the belief that had been put in us at the old consultancy, you know, by the CEO who really saw potential in us, untapped in some cases, saw us as, you know, leaders when we didn't even see ourselves that way yet, really believed in us strongly. I think when the dust settled and we were able to look around, we were able to actually think, yeah, oh, yeah, I am still that person. I am that person now because of the work we've done and the time I've put in, you know, the 10,000 hours and all that. You know, I think when I left marketing had changed. When I was typing, you know, trying to find another job in marketing, I was finding all these jobs on Indeed that were sales jobs, you know, they weren't marketing jobs. And, when I got into marketing in what would have been 2001, right? Like it was pre social media, it was pre Facebook. We were, at the media company, the very first magazine I worked at, we were rolling, you know, the pages onto flats with wax rollers and driving them to the printer to be shot with the big camera. I mean, it was old school. So when I left the industry, marketing had changed so much that I had to go through a real kind of Phoenix rebirth where I was like, I'm not a marketer. I can't even call myself a marketer anymore. Right. But after the post consultancy, I was able to say to myself, I am a coach, I am a consultant, I am a facilitator. What do I do now? What can I do with this experience and expertise that I have now and the tools that have been put in my hand, right? How can I develop a toolbox that can create value for other people? And so that's exactly what we did, is we mapped it out on my dining room wall with Post-it sheets, and we covered that with Sharpie and Post-its, and we mapped out the toolbox and everything we knew and had learned and had been shown, and started to map the potential business model for how we could do this work, using things like the business model canvas that we'd been trained how to run for other people, right? Using tools that we'd been trained to deliver to clients, we turned it in on ourselves and said, okay, here's one possible emergent next step. What is it going to take? What's the minimum viable, investment that we can take and experiment with to validate the idea? Will people buy this? Do I have enough cachet or trust that people would engage me as right? Like all of that, the faith, that to innovate and to believe that no matter how or where you take that next step, that staircase or that net will appear in front of you as you move, that sometimes that faith is required. So we had some of that. And I would say that's how originally, in the genesis of the company, that's how it showed up or was embodied or applied. Most recently, we've had to do it again. We let a year go by at Illustrious. We celebrated a year. We got together. We had dinner. We played mini golf. This was when I was still in Florida, right? Like we had a great year-end retreat. And then we looked around and said, oh shit, we don't have a vision statement. We don't have a mission. We don't have values, right? We haven't taken our own medicine. And so many organizations are guilty of that, right? There's not that kind of what I call self-directed value, right? You're not, and Geoff calls it eating your own dog food, right? You're not looking at yourself as a client. And what I tell people is that sometimes it's as easy as what I've done twice now: create a folder in your client's folder with your name on it. You just treat yourself as a client. And as soon as you take that step, you're like, oh yeah, where are our DISC assessments? Where's our survey results? Where's our customer experience journey? Where's our story brand? And so once you start treating yourself as the client, and then you can enable that self-directed value. And that's what we did the end of last year.
Wow. Yeah. And that it's a lot. I mean, you have so many tools in your tool belt, and to use all of them for yourself at some point, I guess, can seem overwhelming, but at the same time, so necessary. And to your point about taking your own medicine and eating your own dog food, makes a lot of sense, and I think that to tie in with, I did a live session for our Amplified group today, and I spoke about The War of Art, and this book by Stephen Pressfield, and battling resistance. It's so good.
Such a game changer.
It's so good.
Yeah.
And it's so like, on a personal note, it's very much the reason that I haven't stepped into like my Cinderella slippers yet. I'm still rocking my house slippers, versus my Cinderella shoes, because resistance up until this point in time has won. So what I hear in what you said is that actually in practicum, a lot of this stuff can be difficult to do for yourself. But once you've actually done it and then integrated those things in, the squeaky wheel has finally been oiled. And it gives you then the opportunity to come into an organization as a professional with that professional mindset, because not only do you know that these tools work for other people, but you've also integrated them into your culture and have used them for yourself. So you're not only talking the talk, you're also walking the walk. So that's really good to hear in an innovation group, and the way that you're leading for your organization. So, thanks for sharing that. I guess just to end, one more question, and thank you for your time.
Absolutely.
This has been
Thanks for
awesome.
asking me to do this. It's, when you say this stuff out loud, it's like, do I believe what I'm saying sometimes, like when you've been in it for so long, and then you pick your head up and you say, okay, I've been saying these things sometimes multiple times a day. Do I really believe them? So to talk about it with somebody across the table and actually as part of a conversation is helpful. It helps me see if things still fit, and if, it's a sense check for me on the business, and to, what I believe to be true. So I'm getting value from this as well, is what I'm saying.
Awesome. Well, we love
Yeah.
to hear ourselves talk, right? I mean, that's
Mhm.
at the end of the
Yeah.
day, is especially as communicators, facilitators, coaches, consultants, creatives, we love to engage an audience in what
Mhm.
we feel we have to give. It's
Yeah.
like, right? But, and
Mhm.
Um, and it can also be a really great opportunity to check in with, do I actually believe this to be true? And back to the innovation, because I've been thinking about this a lot. I'll share this. Um, I'm really interested in what's next. I have gone through the past couple years of my life with this just an overwhelming feeling of underwhelm, meaning that I am so ready for the next thing. We've seen
Mhm.
so much of the same thing over and over again that I'm like, okay, well, what's the next Facebook? What's the next Instagram? What is
Mhm.
going to be the next title of the thing that we're going to see that's going to change the world? And I believe very strongly that the more that these type of brilliant businesses interact with corporations that are already withstanding and are looking to grow, the more rapidly we are going to see that change, and then see that change take effect, right,
Mhm.
in society in a more positive way. And we've talked about this before in terms of
Mhm.
like being the change, but also not silencing our voice when there are all these platforms that exist to be heard, which is part of like the blessing of being around at this day and age with all this technology around us, and the ability to communicate and interact so effortlessly with somebody halfway around the world, right? So, not to go off on a tangent with that, and to maybe bring it back, to close the circle a little bit, what is a daily practice that you would suggest to business leaders that you do yourself, that you feel is one of the most anchoring practices in your life that has helped you transition your creativity into being something that is easy to apply for change, whether that be for somebody in their personal life or in their business?
I I've had different practices over the years. Um, whether they were musical practices or spiritual practices that have informed the work I do. Um, but I never have a daily practice for long. I I would I would, however, recommend a few different practices for people who are wanting to, if they're like me, try one on for a week, you know, and see how it feels. And see if it feels good for a week, then try it for two. See if there are any long-term effects in interpersonal relationships, or, in your work effort, or your ability to be attentive, or your ability to keep yourself accountable. You're looking for something that moves the needle, right? So if any of these practices work for them, great. One I can think of is, I do have a relatively morning routine where I do, and now that I'm in Asheville and I've got this beautiful balcony and it's overlooking the forest and the mountains, it's just like, it's so much easier to do than when I was in Florida and everything was so flat and hard and sandy. But in Asheville, going out on the balcony and just connecting with the earth and the planet and the beings around me, right? Like just kind of centering in the morning has been really enlivening. And that I think is important. So we'll start there with either a daily grounding, or whether it's yoga or meditation or prayer or whatever that is, whether it's journaling or a moment of silence, but something that just kind of connects, the center of you to everything else, right? Some kind of practice that does that for you would be good to try. Second thing I would recommend would be, it would be in my coaching sessions. I find myself, I have found myself having to ask a question that most coaches find unanswerable. And it's a question that comes from the book, The Coaching Habit by Michael Bungay Stanier. And it's the question, how can I help? It's a little bit counterintuitive, because especially if you're doing some kind of remote call, or if you're not right there with someone, or if it's, if you're their manager, or, well, they're supposed to be helping me. What is that, right? Like that, there can be any number of obstacles to asking the question, how can I help? But in any situation, especially when we're trying to engender or grow a coaching culture within an organization, this one's really important, especially with people who are kind of downline or downstream. How can I help really pushes that onus back on the recipient or the client in a way that has them thinking about solutions and how they can get the tools in the hands of other people to help them solve the problem. Well, we could do this, right? It's, and then the aha is, yeah, it's not all on me to fix it, right? So whether it's you having to take time out of your day to actually help this person is really beside the point. It's getting them thinking about how to decentralize problem solving within themselves, not from intrapersonally to interpersonally. So I love the question, how can I help? And for most managers and leaders, like, they got enough shit on their plate. They don't have time in the day. They're not about to ask how they can help clear obstacles for people, but they've got to. They've got to stop and take a breath and ask their team members how they can help. It's one of the most transformative coaching questions I've found. What other practices?
I might pause you just for a minute there to really
Yeah.
ground in and hone in on that, and take a
Yeah.
moment, take a pause, because that is a question that I started using a couple weeks ago when another coach friend of mine offered it to me.
Mhm.
And just started a dialogue with him. And at the end of it, he said, how can I help support you today? And it was like, it was
Mhm.
like all the birds fell silent,
Mhm.
all the, the trees stopped waving, the wind stopped. And I was like, oh my gosh, it is such a powerful question to ask. And not only in our business relationships, but also just in our interpersonal relationships, because there are a couple hard truths to our success. And one of them is our network. And we have to be engaging in our network, right? And our network is the people that we met the day that we were born, all the way up to who served us coffee yesterday morning. And when we are of service, the more we are engaging and interacting with other people, the more people are inclined to support us, right? And the more we have the opportunities to help, to be of service, where it comes so much more naturally than actually, and the creative process becomes, I think, a little bit more smooth, as opposed to making it this clinical or hard spreadsheet kind of facilitation, where it's actually more effortless and there's a lot more organic flow that takes place. So thank you for sharing that, because I agree 100%. And it's also something that I think is also foundationally rooted in, if we can go off on that for a second, is in our spiritual practices and in our spiritual teachings, right? Of, dear Lord, use me, dear universe, use me. You know, how can I be of service today? What can I allow to come through me that is going to impact the world in some positive way? So thank you for sharing that. I cannot agree with you more. And it is a practice. It should be something that should be initiated all day, every day.
Yeah. Yeah. The last one I can think of would be listening, would be to just get better at listening, not, and like the trope is that, not be listening, for your chance to speak or respond, but just really deeply listening. If people are curious about this, they can look into things like theory U. That's the letter U. They can talk about the 4 levels of listening. Deep listening. They could maybe research the topic of reflective listening and reframing. But I think becoming a better listener is really important for leaders. And, it helps with, it just helps with being the ruler. If you're in charge, you're the king or the queen. And kings, queens consult, with their team before they decide. A king or a queen that decides before they consult is a tyrant. So consulting with your stakeholders and your team before making your decision is important. And listening has to be a part of your practice. And then decide, then do the thing, but listen first, right? So all of these things, from listening to the coaching questions, to the grounding and connecting. I mean, all of these things for me, not daily practices, but practices that I sometimes do daily.
Well, flexibility and flow in that too, right? Is also what I heard, because you had mentioned there are some things that, you were the type of person that if something doesn't feel right, or you mature out of it or grow out of it, it might come back. It might be gone forever, but you give it a try. So there's kind of like that flow of consistency along with flexibility, showing up for yourself to at least try on a new practice to see what the fruit of that labor might potentially be. But it doesn't mean that it has to be a standard now for the next 50 years of your life. So I really like that. So thank you so much, Joran. This was awesome. I appreciate you, sir.
Thank you, Rachel. I appreciate you. Thanks for asking me to do this.
My pleasure.